Welcome to Terra Juno Painting Stuff. In this video, we're going to be building on the first paint layer that we completed in last week's video, painting a male portrait from life using a stationary grid. We're going to be going over mixing flesh tones and maximizing your time with a life model. Welcome back to my studio. In this video, we are going to be building on the first paint layer that we created in the last video. In the last video, we used this grid and we fixed it to the easel using a clamp to make a stationary grid. And this is a really valuable technique because it helped simplify the process of getting proportions and drawing and angles in the portrait. It was a little bit difficult to use, and I have to admit, my neck and back definitely hurt afterwards, but I did feel like it sped along that whole process of getting proportions and angles right. So I do feel like it is a valuable technique to use, and I may use it again. In this video, we're going to be going over our first paint layer with paint that is higher in chroma, meaning more saturated, and we're going to be increasing our value range, meaning using darker darks and lighter lights to get more of a three-dimensional feel in this portrait. I like splitting the process up because I feel it gives you a little bit more control, and you also get a sense of depth that you just don't get in one layer. Next, I'm going to be oiling into the dry paint layer to revive the color and make my brushstrokes glide smoothly. This will help the two layers to blend. I'm using half walnut oil and half linseed oil. Now, drying oils have a tendency to yellow, and walnut oil tends to yellow a little bit less than linseed oil. It has less linoleic acid in it, which is one of the compounds that causes oil to dry. As a result, it's slower drying, and it tends to make a more brittle surface than linseed oil. And linseed oil has a higher linoleic content, so it dries quicker and it creates a stronger surface, but it also does yellow quite a bit. So by mixing the two, I'm hoping to mitigate the negative aspects of both oils. This layer should be very thin. I'm wiping over it with a dry, lint-free cloth just to take off any excess oil. On the palette, we have Permanent Green, Titanium White, Fast Matte, Mucky Gray, Prussian Blue, Ivory Black, Alizarin Crimson, Cadmium Red Medium, Terra Rosa, Burnt Sienna, and Yellow Ochre. Before my model arrives, I'm going to be mixing up some lighter and darker colors, as well as brighter versions of the colors that I've already used on the face. The color mixing can take a while, so doing it before the model shows up will maximize your time with the model. You can always adjust the colors while the model is in front of you if needed, but you will save a lot of time by doing this beforehand. Most of my color mixtures are made from titanium white, burnt sienna, black, terra rosa, and yellow ochre. You can get a wide variety just using a few colors. The cool tones on the flesh are made by just adding black. Now that my paint is mixed up and my dry paint layer is oiled into, I'm ready for my model. I'm starting with my new lighter and brighter midtones and building on the forms that were roughed in the first layer. I'm not focusing on detail in this portrait. I want to use my brushwork to create the impression of detail as much as possible. In the last video, I had about a 2-hour session with the model to do the drawing and the first paint layer of the head. In this session, I'll have an hour, followed by one last half-hour session to work on the hair and shirt. When working from a life model, you may not get a whole lot of time, so you want to be prepared and have a plan, like having your composition ideas or any costumes or props ready to go. Pre-mixing up some color piles will also help maximize your model time. If you're not used to working from life, it can be a little bit awkward at first. It takes a bit of practice, especially if you learned by using photos. There's natural movement that just happens during life, and you kind of have to learn how to adapt to it. Keep in mind, the more you work from life, the faster you'll be able to paint. There's a sense of urgency that you tend to get when you're working from life that you can lose if you're using photos. You'll get more at ease with working from life and get better at decision making. Here's where we got in our second session. I didn't get to any of the clothes, I was just focusing on the face. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to finish it up in the third session. When I'm painting a model, I will let the model choose what we listen to. This will help them from falling asleep or becoming bored, and also having that bored, dead expression you often see in life paintings. Expect to be taking small breaks every 15 to 30 minutes, depending on your pose. Be sure to provide some cushions and make sure that the room temperature is comfortable for your model. Believe it or not, sitting still for prolonged periods is actually quite difficult and strenuous. If your model is bored and uncomfortable, they're going to start to move and shift, so make sure your studio is a comfortable place for them to work. Also, if you need your model to change clothing or undress, provide a private space for them to do so. Well, I think that I'm going to call this portrait done. It's been a really fun portrait to paint, and as always, it's a real pleasure to work from life. I like that I have so much more information available to me to make a painting when I work from life as opposed to photos. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next week.